This TradingView indicator finds perfect support and resistance levels in the market. And when used together with this indicator, we can find great entry points and trading opportunities. And I want to show you guys these two indicators right away because they are free, easy to use, and they can help your trading tremendously. To make these indicators work, it's super important to have the right settings, so make sure to watch this video to the very end and pay extra attention when we look at the settings for the indicators. But yeah guys, let's not waste any time here, let's jump right into the video. Alright, so let's start this video off here by opening up a chart. Right now as we're speaking, we're looking at Bitcoin on a daily time frame. And let's open up our first indicator here. So we go up to the indicators tab, and what we want to search for here is pivot points. And we want to open up the indicator called pivot points high and low. And now we can see a few points here appearing on the chart. These points right here are called pivot points. And pivot points marks significant levels on the chart. The upper points here are called pivot highs, and the lower points here are called pivot lows. A pivot high is simply when we have a candlestick where the candles to the left printed lower highs and the candles to the right also printed lower highs. So if we have a chart that looks something like this right here would have been the pivot high, and the opposite is true for a pivot low. But as you can see, right now we have many points appearing here on the chart, and when finding the best support and resistance levels, it is important to only use significant pivot highs and pivot lows. And in order to find more significant pivot highs and pivot lows, we need to change the settings here of the indicator. So we go up here to the upper left corner and we press here on the settings tab. Make sure that you are here on the input section of the settings, and as you can see here it says length left and right, and we do want to change these settings. The 10 and 10 here basically means that the pivot highs are calculated based on 10 candles to the left and 10 candles to the right. So in order to make the pivot points more significant, I recommend to change the pivot high left to 20 and the pivot high right to 20. And we also of course want to do the same here for the lows, so we change the pivot lows to 20. If you want to, you can also change the colors of the pivot points, but I think the white color is looking good, especially because I have a black chart. So now we are done here with the settings and we are ready to click OK. So as you can see, now we have fewer pivot points here on the chart. And this is very important because we do want to base our support and resistance levels on the most significant points here on the chart. So now you may of course wonder, how do we use this indicator to draw perfect support and resistance levels? Well, what you're looking out for here is that you do want to find an area here on the chart that contains many pivot points. So as you can see, for example, this area right here, you can see that this area have been an area where we have been seeing many significant pivot points. You can see all the way back here, we saw a pivot low, we saw a pivot high, pivot low, pivot low, pivot low. So you can see that this is a price area where we have been seeing key reversals in the market multiple times. So this is your signal that this is a key support or resistance level. What I usually like to do when I have found a key level is that I go up here to my rectangle tool and I want to draw the support or resistance level and contain all of these pivot points. So I would draw the level something like this. As you can see, the most important part here is that the pivot points here are contained in the support or resistance area. If we look down here a bit, we can see that we can draw yet another significant level around here, right? Looking something like this. You can see that right here we have yet another area that contains both many pivot lows and pivot highs. Let's look a bit more to the left here, look historically, and we could draw yet another key area somewhere around here, right? Because this area contained 1, 2, and 3 pivot points. You can also use your pivot points to draw significant trend lines. As you can see, for example, right here, we had one significant pivot point, we had yet another significant pivot point, and we can also see that we saw a touch right here. And guys, you are in luck because you don't have to do this yourself, because we do have yet another indicator that uses pivot points to find these significant trend lines in the market. So now let's take a look at our second indicator. Let's go up once again here to the indicators tab, and we want to search for quant view. Go down here a bit and you can see that we have an indicator called trend line pivots. Let's open this one up. And as you can see, this indicator automatically identified the trend line we talked about recently. What's really cool about this indicator is, as you can see, this one also identifies when trend lines break. You can see we have a green cross right here, which identified the breakout of this trend line. But once again, guys, in order to make this one as effective as possible, it's important to change the settings. So let's go up here to the settings tab, and here first of all you can change the colors to whatever you like. I think I will keep this one as it is right now, but let's go down here to where it says max number of crossed lines to show. So here you can change these numbers and you will see that more lines will appear here on the chart. I personally do think that 4 here is a good number, because when you trade, it's important to keep your chart as clean as possible, and when we trade we usually only use the most recent trend lines, so by increasing this number too much, your chart can be a bit cluttered. So I prefer to have this one on 4, but you can definitely try around a bit here, and perhaps you prefer to have it on a higher level. For the cross source here, make sure to have it on close if that is not already marked, and you can also, if you want to, change the max line length. However, the most important settings is this one where it says 9 right here, and that is the pivot length. So remember guys, from our previous indicator we're using pivot highs and pivot lows with the length of 20. So if you want these trend lines to be based on the pivot points we already have on the chart, it's important to change this pivot length to 20, because now the trend lines will be based on these points. So let's change the pivot length to 20 and click OK. And as you can see, now the indicator will try to draw trend lines based on the pivot points. So for example, right here we have a pivot point, right here we have yet another pivot point. So this indicator now uses these pivot points to try to find the best trend lines. So for example, right here it identified a potential upward sloping trend line, and right here it of course identified the trend line we found earlier based on this pivot point and this pivot point. If we look a bit to the left here, you can also see that this indicator beautifully identified the trend line right here based on one pivot point, based on another pivot point. You can see that this trend line got broken right here. We got an automatic signal from this indicator with this green cross right here, and you can see that this break was actually the beginning of a massive uptrend for Bitcoin. So now guys, before we take a look at our last indicator, which is one of the most loved and most used support and resistance indicators here on TradingView, I do want to show you guys how we can use these indicators together to take good trades here in the market. So first of all, let's take a look at this price right here. We already know that we have a significant downward sloping resistance, and by using these two pivot points, we can also see that we had some kind of downward sloping support right here. Together, these two lines pretty much prints a sort of large falling wedge looking pattern. One way to trade this pattern is to enter right here, and you may wonder, why was this a good entry signal? Well, the first reason is that this entry signal appeared here at our key support level. Not only was this a key horizontal support, but this one was also a downward sloping support of the falling wedge. So an entry point right here is basically a trade anticipating the potential breakout. Another reason making this one a valid entry point is because this right here is actually a bullish Japanese candlestick, which we call a piercing pattern. So right now we have multiple confluences. We have a bullish candlestick pattern happening at a key support, and we also have a bullish short pattern, the falling wedge right here, which is a continuation pattern indicating higher likelihood of continuation here towards the upside. So we go up here to our long position, we enter here at the candle close of the piercing pattern. The stop loss we want to set below our key support. And I also like to leave room here for some wiggle room. So I usually set my stop loss quite a bit below the support here. So if the price starts to fall down, we have the support area pretty much as a shield here that can protect the price from hitting our stop loss. As for your profit target, because this is a large pattern, we can allow for some high risk to reward ratio. We can go for risk to reward ratios much higher than 2 in this case. We could go for, 3, 4, or perhaps even 5, because this right here is a large pattern and we are anticipating a strong breakout here. So as you can see, in this case, by combining multiple tools here, as well as using candlestick patterns for our confirmation, we got a very attractive trade. And by the way, guys, if you want to learn more about Japanese candlestick patterns, I actually recently put out a very long Japanese candlestick pattern trading course here on the channel. That is the longest video I have ever made. It's a course, 1.5 hours. So if you guys want to really dive deep into Japanese candlestick patterns, I will make sure to leave a link to that video up in the corner in the eye somewhere here. So now guys, let's take a look at our final indicator. But real quick before we do that, I just want to mention that by using the 2 previous indicators, you can already find extremely significant support and resistance levels here in the market. So this last indicator is pretty much just a bonus indicator that can improve the levels even further and also make them a bit more easier to identify here. So let's go up here to the indicators tab once again, and let's search for Lux Algo support and resistance. And as you can see, you do want to use this indicator at the top called support and resistance levels with breaks. So as you can see, now a few red lines and blue lines appeared on the chart. But what we want to do now is that we want to go up here to the settings tab for this indicator. And here where it says left bars, remember from our previous indicators that we're using pivot highs and pivot lows based on 20 periods. So once again, we do want to change this indicator left bar to 20, and we want to change the right bar to 20 as well. So all of our indicators lines up and works well together. You can also of course change the style of these levels if you want to, but I will just keep it as it is and we are ready to click OK. There are a few great ways to use this indicator. The first use case is pretty similar to the first pivot high, pivot low indicator we talked about, and you will probably see why. As you can see, Lux Algo, this indicator bases the support and resistance levels on the pivot points, right? You can see that all of these blue and red lines are drawn here. You can see they are drawn from the pivot points. You can see this one is drawn from the pivot point, this one is drawn from the pivot point, this one as well. But this indicator, if some traders prefer to not draw zones, they want to draw more, lines as the key support and resistance levels. I highly prefer to draw zones because, support and resistance are never perfect lines. They should always be seen as sort of broader price zones. But if you are one of these traders that draw, only draw lines, one way to use this indicator is to try to draw a line here which aligns very closely to the Lux Algo lines. So for example, if we draw a line right here, you can see that this line, we want this line to be as close as possible to many lines. So you can see this one, we draw exactly on that line. You can see that this line is very close to the blue line. This line is pretty much on the blue line, and it's also pretty close to this one and this one. So this right here is a very similar use case as the first indicator we talked about. But another thing that is very nice about the Lux Algo lines is that here we will also get signals when the horizontal lines break. So for example, if we look down here to the previous resistance area, you can see that Lux Algo indeed drew a resistance line right here based on the pivot point we identified earlier. But you can also see that we actually got this break signal. You can see this right here where it says B, a green B here. You can see that we get the automatic signal that this level got broken. So that is one nice thing about this indicator. With the trendline indicator we talked about earlier, we already got the signals, but we had no signals from the first indicator, the pivot point indicator. So this can be a nice bonus if you want these signals appearing on the chart as well. But alright guys, so now when you know how to find the perfect support and resistance levels in the market, I highly recommend you guys to learn about Japanese candlestick patterns. I just recently put out a free 1.5-hour course on candlestick patterns, so if you have the time, I highly recommend you guys to watch that video next.